All right, welcome back, everyone. Ready to dive deep.
Absolutely. Always ready.
Great. So today we're looking at something a lot of you are probably familiar with, at least on the surface,
Yeah.
the 80-20 rule, or as it's also known, the Pareto Principle.
Right.
And, the idea is that 80% of your results
Mm-hmm.
come from just 20% of your efforts.
It's a powerful concept.
It is, yeah. And we're going to kind of go a little beyond the surface level today.
Okay, sounds good.
And so maybe we could start with, just a little bit of background on this for people who maybe aren't as familiar.
Yeah.
Where did this whole idea even come from?
Well, it's interesting. It actually came about from looking at wealth distribution.
Oh, wow.
Back in 1896, there was an Italian economist named Vilfredo Pareto.
Okay.
And he found that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by just 20% of the population.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and he wrote about this in his book, Cours d'économie politique. I hope I said that right.
Yeah, I think so.
But what's really interesting is that this observation that he made, in economics,
Right.
actually has implications for all sorts of areas of our lives.
That's right. And it's amazing how an observation
Yeah,
way back then can still be so relevant.
absolutely. I mean, it seems to pop up everywhere in business, in personal productivity, even in relationships. You mean it.
Yeah, for sure. I was actually listening to the Synthetic Chronicles podcast
Okay.
the other day, and they were talking about it, and they were saying that, especially in today's world,
Yeah,
where we're just bombarded with information,
crazy.
and, with social media and
Right.
the 24-hour news cycle,
Yeah.
it feels like we're always on, always doing.
Exactly. And that's where this principle can really help, I think, because it forces us to pause and say,
Yeah.
okay, are we focusing on the right things? Are we actually putting our energy towards that 20% that really moves the needle?
Yeah, that's such a good point.
It's easy to get caught up in the busy work,
Right.
kind of lose sight of the big picture.
And I feel like, Tim Ferriss really brought this idea
Mhm.
to a modern audience
Yeah.
with the 4-Hour Workweek, which I feel like was really sort of the Bible
For sure.
for a lot of people in terms of being more efficient.
Yeah.
And didn't he have this idea about achieving a 10x increase in your results?
He did. And it really boils down to focusing on those high impact tasks, identifying, that crucial 20% that really drives your success, and then figuring out how to, streamline or maybe even eliminate the rest. It's kind of ruthless, but effective.
Yeah, I think he even calls some of that stuff the low-impact 80% or something like that.
He does. He talks about eliminating the things that are just sucking up your time
Right.
without really contributing much to your goals.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me in
Yeah.
a work setting.
Uh-huh.
But how do you actually
Yeah.
put this into practice?
Well, I mean, you can start by just taking a look at your to-do list, right? So you have your to-do list,
Yeah.
and you're looking at all the tasks that you have to get done, and you ask yourself, which of these tasks are really going to move the needle? Like, if I could only do a few things today,
Yeah.
what would those things be? And those are likely going to be your 20%.
Okay.
Right. And then you can think about, okay, how can I delegate some of this other stuff?
Yeah.
Can I automate any of it?
Uh-huh.
Can I just get rid of some of it altogether?
Right, right. Yeah, that makes sense. But what about in your personal life? I mean, can you just
Uh-huh.
ditch 80% of your friends?
Well, I wouldn't recommend that.
Okay.
But, it's not about cutting people out necessarily. It's more about being mindful of where you're investing your time and energy.
Yeah.
Right? And thinking about, okay, which relationships really fill me up? Which ones are mutually supportive?
Uh-huh.
And which ones might be, a little bit more draining?
Yeah, it's just being more intentional
Exactly.
about where you put your energy.
Yeah.
I guess, but is it always a perfect
That's a good question.
80-20 split?
It doesn't have to be exact. It's more of a guideline than a hard and fast rule. I mean, in some cases, it might be 70-30 or 90-10. It depends on what you're looking at.
Right.
But the principle is the same,
Yeah.
Focus on those vital few inputs that are driving the majority of your results.
Okay, so
Yeah.
what happens if you
That's an interesting question.
focus too much on that top 20%? I mean, are there any downsides
Yeah.
to over-optimizing?
There can be, yeah. I mean, while this principle is really powerful, it's important to remember that sometimes those things in the 80%, they might have value too, even if it's not immediately obvious, right? Sometimes those seemingly less important tasks or those relationships that might not seem as close at first glance, they might actually end up surprising you.
Yeah, I guess you don't want to
You don't want to cut yourself off.
cut yourself off entirely.
Exactly. You want to keep an open mind.
Okay, so it's really about prioritizing, but not
Yeah.
necessarily neglecting everything else.
Exactly. And it's also a dynamic process, right? I mean, things that might be in the 80% today
Right.
might become part of your 20% tomorrow.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So for all of you listening out there,
Yeah.
Think about this.
Okay.
What's one area of your life where you could maybe apply the 80-20 rule?
Yeah, good question. And to add to that, what's one thing you can do differently this week to start taking advantage of this? Think about it.
That's a great question to end on. Thanks
Yeah,
so much.
you too.
Really appreciate it. All right, and we'll see you all next time for another deep dive.
See you then.